I want to show a little video that we can have a little discussion about. And the subject matter of this is called The Future of Fighting Games, One Button Special Moves and Controller Arms Race. This is done by a video a few months back by a content creator by the name of Press Button Win. I don't know if it's an individual entirely, but I saw a portion of this and I thought this is interesting, and I wanted to, you know, respond and react to it as well, because I never watched the entirety of it. I watched like the first 4 minutes of it, so I want to see the rest of it and also kind of like give my input on this discussion and this debate, so this way like people can like get insight into what they think about this subject matter, because I think it pertains heavily to 2XKO, which I did play on stream. And it's definitely going to be an interesting subject matter, because we're going to see more games like this, more fighting games in particular, just like this in the future. And there's a lot that I would love to like comment about. So before we do that, I'm going to switch this to this. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about this.
People who don't play fighting games often specifically point to traditional special move inputs as one of the big reasons why they avoid the genre. These same people might point to Smash Bros. And its popularity to prove their point. From the very beginning, special moves in Smash have been done by pressing just the special button, or the special button plus a direction. Smash invented one-button special moves. Except, maybe it didn't? Let's look at Guile in Street Fighter II.
And here's the thing, I've played many other fighting games that include one-button special moves. I remember this fighting game back on the PlayStation 1 that was really fucking cool. Had incredible single-player content. I loved the game, but it was incredibly simplistic. It had two buttons, a block and strike. That's it. So you would have directional inputs like forward attack, back attack, down attack, up attack, and basically you would do special moves or unique strikes, while if you spammed the attack button by itself, you do like a simple combo. So the game was really just based on like very simple fundamentals, but it had defensive mechanics with the block button, so you could do like back block, forward block, up block, and these would do different defensive tools that you'd have, as well as just holding the block button down. So, you know, a game that was very, very simple. This game was called Dead Zone. This game was awesome. It was cinematic as hell, had awesome single-player content, and it had just a breath of like visual flair that was really cool. It was very anime-ish too as well, and it was a game that I really, really liked. I played the hell out of it as a kid, but it was pretty brain dead overall and very simplistic. But it was still fun. It was still a good time. It was, for me, like a 2D Smash. Like, granted, Smash is 2D, but like just a Street Fighter-esque with Smash buttons, basically. You know, I guess the closest interpretation of it would be, what's that game, Rising Thunder? I think it would be the closest iteration to that as well.
Guile's flash kick, you hold down, and then you press up plus kick. Assuming you've been crouch blocking for a second, flash kick is a one-button special. In that same situation, where you've been crouch blocking for a second, if you press forward plus punch, you get a sonic boom, with basically the exact same input, forward plus a button, that you do with Mario and Smash to throw a fireball.
Yeah, but so personally, I don't identify that as a one-button special. I literally identify a one-button special with just an input and one other input, and that is it. Like, doing multiple inputs, I don't identify it as a one-button special. But it's simple. It's a simple input, you know. There are plenty of games that have non-one-button specials. So, granted, I get what he's saying, though. I don't think this quantifies as a one-button special, because technically it's three inputs. You know, back, forward, and that. Granted, you could say that forward and forward plus a special move is that one-button special. But I don't think that this is. I think this is splitting hairs a little bit.
Guile's specials were explicitly designed for players who had difficulty doing the motion inputs for Ryu's Fireball and Dragon Punch specials.
And the reason why it was this way is because the input window for this, it's not that it's a hard input to do, it's that the input window is strict. You have to do it quickly and cleanly, which is demanding. You know, it's not the hardest thing to do, but it requires repetition and requires time commitment, which is difficult when the only way to play this game, if you didn't have it on cartridge, was to cash in coins. You know, and if you get your ass beat before you can even do it again, or you know, a player kicks your ass before you can even do a special move at all, or any button for that matter, then you didn't get a chance to even learn how to do it. You know.
The devs smartly realized that these moves needed to be balanced with their inputs in mind. If Guile has charge, it's a lot easier to react to something with a flash kick since it's basically a one-button special move at that point. This is balanced out by Guile needing charge to be able to do the move in the first place.
Yes.
Ryu can Dragon Punch whenever he wants, but the complexity of the input balances that out and makes it tough to do that move on reaction to certain things. Simple inputs and traditional inputs are both valid design choices, but moves need to be balanced depending on which one you pick. If you don't do that, you'll end up with Guile in the 3DS version of Street Fighter 4, where you could use the touchscreen to do sonic booms and flash kicks without having to charge first.
Oof. That sounds fucking chaotic to me.
It's awesome! It's so great! It's the best. You guys have to pick Guile. You guys have to set your moves for Guile, and you'll be fine.
Street Fighter V hit 4.5 million copies sold in May of 2020. 4.5 million copies is impressive, but it's not hard to imagine Capcom looking at Super Smash Bros. Ultimate with its 32 million copies sold and wondering what they can do to get a bigger piece of the pie. Smash is generally seen as easy and approachable, and Street Fighter is, relatively speaking, not. With Street Fighter VI, Capcom decided they were finally doing easy special moves, at least as an option. They did it in a weird way. Street Fighter has traditionally had 6 attack buttons, light, medium, and heavy punch, and light, medium, and heavy kick. Capcom, reluctant to abandon the legacy special move inputs that they pioneered, left this traditional 6 attack button option in the game and called it Classic Controls. The easy special move option is called Modern Controls. You can do special moves with Modern Controls by just pressing the special button, or pressing the special button along with the direction.
I personally think that this approach is probably the smartest approach I've ever seen when a legacy fighting game. I think that if you have a brand new fighting game and you introduce like modern control scheme as the standard control scheme, then I think that's fine. But I think that with a legacy fighting game, you shouldn't be fucking with the legacy systems.
Smash only has simple inputs for its specials, so every special move's properties can be balanced around that input. In Street Fighter VI, Capcom kind of painted themselves into a corner, since it's impossible to balance a move for 2 wildly different input methods. Let's look at an example. Supers in Street Fighter do big damage and often have invulnerability, allowing them to blow through your opponent's moves. So the minute you get Super Meter, what's to stop you from just sitting and waiting for your opponent to commit to literally anything and then supering them for free? Doing a move on reaction to something is a 2-part process. First, you've got to see the thing you want to react to, recognize it, and decide to react to it. After that, you have to do the input for the move you're reacting with. A common input for supers is something like a double quarter circle forward plus an attack button. This means the fastest you can possibly do the input is 6 frames. Realistically, you're not going to do it perfectly, and it's going to take you longer than that. So your reaction time plus the input time means that you can't just super your opponent for free the minute they touch a button.
People wonder, like, whenever you see people accuse other people of cheating, like doing scripts or using a macro, people always wonder, like, how do you know that they're doing that? And you can tell based on the frames of animation how quickly they did it. If they're using mono control, then it makes complete sense, because then you can literally do it in 2 frames. But if you are someone that is using classic controls and you're able to do a super move in less than 3 frames, or even less than 4 frames, that is highly irregular and highly suspicious, because the input window for you actually doing the input should be a minimum of 6. Possibly, you know, sure, maybe you're on the wild end of the spectrum and you're someone that can do it at 5 frames. Maybe you're in the 1 millionth of a percentile, like 1 bazillionth of a percentile, and can do it in 4. Maybe. I doubt it. 5 frames should be the fastest that anyone should be able to do it for a 6-frame move, you know, theoretically, even with hitbox. You know, you can drastically improve your inputs a lot and find ways to shortcut things, sure, but it should not be possible to do a 6-frame super move in a 3-frame window. It's not possible.
In Street Fighter 6, Luke's level 1 super is fast and reaches really far. If you're using classic controls, the input limits you from blowing up lots of things on reaction with it. But if you pick modern controls, you can do the super with just heavy attack plus special. You can even assign a button to heavy plus special to do this with the press of a single button. This means that a modern Luke player can react to things that a classic Luke player just can't.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Yes, I've seen this plenty. I've seen this plenty.
Man, come on, please hit him out of it. Dude, modern level 1 Luke is so fucking dumb.
Modern and classic are not two different ways to pilot the same character. The modern version and the classic version are two different characters. In Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, you don't commit to simple versus technical inputs at character select, so they avoided the Street Fighter 6 accidentally created 2 characters problem. You can freely use either simple or technical inputs during the match.
Okay, I think that he could use a little bit more context for what he's talking about. So in Street Fighter 6, you have to commit to both, to either classic controls or modern controls. So if you want to do, you know, the traditional way of doing a fighting game, you have to commit to classic controls. You can't do both. In Grand Blue, you can do both. You can, it gives you both options, but you're more rewarded for doing the traditional input. However, I think they recently changed that where you can actually, it has no impact whatsoever. You can do either or. And I would be fine if they do, what's the game called? 2XKO this way, where all the moves are just done with just quarter circle movements, including super moves for that matter, where everything's done just through quarter circle movements, and they can have both options available at the same time, so that way both players feel comfortable. You know, that's my biggest gripe with 2XKO, is that the simple inputs are very jarring for me, but more importantly, what they really are is that they make it difficult to buffer inputs, because you have to just commit to the input, or like, you know, trying to buffer an input feels awkward. I think that the feeling of doing a rotation as a buffer feels far more natural and intuitive than just doing down, down, or forward, forward, constantly, you know, and it just feels awkward. So I think that it's something that they should really consider doing, is that, like, just create a very basic classic input system into 2XKO without, you know, without like removing what the original inputs are and not giving any benefits one way or another.
I really don't love this solution either. You're adding an extra button to do the simple inputs, so you're complicating the control scheme. You get bonus damage for using technical inputs, so to play correctly, players will have to consciously choose to use technical inputs in situations where reaction time is not a factor, alongside simple inputs.
And I think that they remove this with the buff of damage. You know, I don't think that they do this anymore. I think they remove that in the game, where doing technical inputs now have no bearing on the gameplay format whatsoever.
Reaction time does matter, or you need to be able to mash out the move. Simple inputs are supposed to be there to make the game more approachable, so it seems kind of self-defeating or self-contradictory or something if the presence of simple inputs actually make your game more complicated. All of these issues I'm describing are due to the fact that these developers want to have their cake and eat it too. They really want simple special moves, and they really do not want to get rid of traditional inputs. Luckily, the solution is pretty obvious. Just pick one or pick the other and design your game around it. You can find it in indie titles like Fantasy Strike or Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, but we have yet to see a large traditional fighting game developer take this risk. The trend towards simple special move inputs has only gotten stronger.
I don't agree with that. I do not agree with that.
You can find it in
So I don't disagree with what he's saying here, which is commit to one, pick one, and stick to it.
Pick one or pick the other and design your game around it.
That's reasonable. I think that's completely reasonable. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I think that if you design your game to be played a specific way and that's your intention for it, there's nothing wrong with that. And consumers will buy it too. They will be interested in it. But the reason why they want both is because they want both new players that are just going to play the game for like 20 hours to enjoy the game just as much as people that are not going to play the game for more than 20 hours.
You can find it in indie titles like Fantasy Strike or Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, but we have yet to see a large traditional fighting game developer take this risk.
You want to know which fighting game did it? Street Fighter V. That was technically a AAA fighting game. Oh, you want to know another fighting game? Tekken 7 had non-traditional inputs. Oh, you want another like a AAA budget game? Let's say that what was another game? Technically Street Fighter 4, all these games sold well and did well. They've taken this risk. The reason why they're doing it now is because they want more. And that's not because the developers are purely making that decision out of what they want. They're doing it because they know that in order to appease their publishers, they must make sales, because fighting games have a bad rep by like publishers that fighting games are not popular. They're too niche of a market, when in fact it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the content in the game, things to do, things to achieve, things to fight for, progression,
The trend towards simple special move inputs has only gotten stronger, and I do think it's important to recognize that they have some significant downsides.
And I agree with that. I think that he's absolutely right about that. It has increased, like the trend of it is going to continue to grow more, which is why that, 2xKO is the way it is. But I'm going to be 100% frank. I think that 2xKO is not straddling that line between like a fighting game that is for new players and a fighting game that is for veteran players. I think it's somewhere in between, and I think that that's going to alienate a lot of people that are going to be interested in the game, because the game is not for everyone, for that matter. I liked the game. I thought it was a lot of fun. But there were a lot of times when I was playing the game and I was thinking, man, this game can be fucking annoying. And that feeling kicked in really quick in like 2 days. In my second day, I began to realize how annoyed I was getting with the game. And it had nothing to do with balance problems. It had to do with the way that the game was designed and the way that the game felt. And that game is a great example of where it commits to one thing. And I would just prefer if the game would give me the option to play it the other way instead. That's for me at a personal point of view, because I do look at myself as someone that commits a lot of time to fighting games. I do look at myself as not a hardcore fighting game player. I will drop a fighting game if I'm not enjoying it. I will not. If I'm just not enjoying it, I will drop it and I'll play something else,
Traditional motion inputs let you do more with less. You can keep the number of action buttons low while still allowing for expansive movesets. Simple inputs tend to have issues with this and run into one or both of the following issues.
That's actually a great point. I never thought about that.
You need a lot of buttons. If you pick modern controls in Street Fighter 6, you need more buttons and you have access to fewer moves.
So what is he talking about here? He's talking about the prospect of when you play a simple input system, like go up, special move down, special move forward, special move back, special move. The nice thing about having motion inputs like quarter circles and stuff like that is that you can add so many moves with that quarter circle input. So instead of just doing forward special move, you could do down to forward light punch or down to forward light kick. But both inputs do different things because they're, you expand the move list significantly with that. And I never thought about that until you mentioned that till now. I don't know why I never thought about that. So yeah, see, you can vastly expand it, but there are other ways to get around that, honestly.
2. You need to use weird inputs. For example, Smash has a single attack button. If you press the analog stick slightly forward and press it, you get a tilt attack. If you press the stick further forward and press attack, you get a smash attack. If you press the analog stick further forward and wait a tiny amount of time before pressing the attack button, you get a dash attack. So you have 3 extremely similar inputs for 3 distinct moves. I personally struggle to control my character in Smash way more than I do in any traditional fighting game.
So, let's talk about this. Why does this exist in Smash? The reason why this exists in Smash is because it's a middle ground between doing simple inputs, but also having something that's executional required. So people can do this, but higher level players are going to be able to do more advanced things and be more consistent with this input than committed players. For me, this is unintuitive, and it sounds like it is for this guy as well. It's not intuitive, so it feels awkward, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because then it creates a skill gap. And skill gaps are okay. You want skill gaps to exist in a certain level. That's how you define one player from another. That's how you can determine this player is genuinely better than the other player, by having skill gaps. But despite there being a skill gap in this, to me it feels uncomfortable, and that uncomfortability can deter me more than actually whether the game is balanced or not. If I genuinely find the game to be uncomfortable to play, then I find it unfun. That's for me at a level, and I think that is more common than people realize.
Despite those issues, I think we'll continue to see a trend towards simplified inputs. The biggest reason is the one we've already talked about. People perceive games with traditional inputs as difficult, and they perceive games with one-button specials as approachable. The second big reason for this push towards simplified controls and one-button specials, the one that we haven't talked about at all yet, is controllers.
I want to touch something on at this point about games being hard to play, fighting games being hard to play because of traditional inputs. I genuinely don't believe that people are actually having a hard time doing traditional inputs, and that's the reason why they're not having fun with the game. I think the reason why they're not having fun with the game is because the game doesn't keep them committed to the time that they're investing into it. You can learn how to get better at those things, but it requires time. But the problem at hand is there's two ways to do that. Either you get your ass beat online by a better player, or you can possibly find a player that's within your skill level, maybe. Or you go to the lab and you train and you practice. Both of these methods are not traditionally fun. The best way of doing that is getting players to play single-player content in your game that gets you to commit the time for you and train you to learn how to do those things naturally and organically. The easiest way to do that is to have fun things for people to do that tricks them into learning how to participate in those things. And I think that Street Fighter VI's World Tour mode does a great job of it. However, it doesn't go all the way. I think that in a lot of ways, they don't incentivize you to actually do the fun things enough, or do the things that you need to do enough to actually enjoy it. And one of the things that they fail to do is include quests as a way to unlock these mini games that you can do and participate in. Like, for example, get a job. Well, it's great. The jobs teach you how to do quarter circle movements, which is fun and all, but it should require that as multiple different quests, side quests that you could participate in. So that way there's a reason to keep doing those mini games. But a lot of times they just include the mini games and you never have to do them again. And that was one of the big mistakes with the World Tour mode, is that they didn't really make you participate in those things as side quests and reward you for that time and commitment. And that way you learn how to actually do it through a fun method. It's not that different from playing a Dance Dance game or a rhythm game. It's the same fucking thing. People will commit the time to it if they're having fun, but you're not including the fun part in the training part, and that's the problem with training modes, is that training modes are not traditionally fun. They're meant there for studying, and that can be fun for some people, but that's a rare subset of people that are playing your fighting game. Most people are not going to enjoy training mode that much. The more important factor is to include a single-player content that teaches people how to play the game. But when I say teach people, not just show them how to do it, but get them to commit to the time to keep doing it over and over and again. Repetition is how people learn, right? So make them repetitively do it in a fun way. Create a gameplay loop,
Traditional fighting games were born in arcades. The games were designed for arcade cabinets that used levers for movement and had some number of action buttons on a flat panel. We already talked about how moves need to be balanced around their inputs, but the arcade environment allowed developers to take this a step further and balance moves around not just the input, but around the specific input device they knew players would be using.
Yes.
The classic example is Tekken's Electric Wind God Fist. You need to do forward, neutral, down, and then down forward plus 2. The final part of the motion, the down forward, needs to be input on the exact same frame as the attack button. The developers knew players were in arcades using a lever for directions, so precisely hitting down forward on the lever with your left hand on the same frame that you hit the attack button with your right hand is really difficult. On an all-button controller, you don't have that ambiguity of when the lever will actuate a specific direction, so doing consistent electrics becomes pretty trivial. Hybrid layouts like the cross-up allow for the same thing.
And yes, there's a lot of controversy revolving around this for a long time about the ease of electrics and making electrics as easy as possible, because of, I wouldn't say as easy as possible, that these controllers have effectively made these things trivial but more incredibly easy to do, and with that comes a significant buff to the characters that they're using. Which is where I think that, like, you know, Tekken 8 did a great job by including heat systems, so that way everyone can do electrics freely at the cost of meter, so it slightly gives the levers advantage to do it, but at the end of the day, the fight is still going to be not determined by one move. It's going to be determined by, you know, your neutrals and all the other skill sets that you need. So personally, I don't think that it matters that much that people can do electrics as easily as this. I think it's perfectly acceptable as long as you include mechanics that allow you to bypass that issue. Like, you know, having heat, for example. And I think it was a smart decision, and I think it's not only did it make the game more fun, but it did balance, it brought the levers, it brought the levers, like, because, like, hitbox was, like, up here, or, like, non-lever controllers were up here, and then lever controllers were down here, like, I would say, like, down here, in terms of strength in Tekken 7, and this, with the heat system and the mechanic they introduced in Tekken 8, it brought it, like, a little closer. This is still better. Hitbox is still significantly better in Tekken, but this brought it a little closer because of the heat system, and I think that was a really smart decision, and a smart way that they balanced the game.
With the right input device, something that took years to master now takes minutes. If you balance a move and its input with a specific input device in mind, the move's strength will depend on which controller the player is using.
That said, I do want to quantify. I'm not carrying water for, like, hitbox and cross up. I do think that those are fine, tournament legal and whatever. Communities don't think that they're bad devices, but here's where I have an issue with it. I don't have an issue with the device itself. I have an issue with where does the limit get to at a certain point with some of these devices. You have to put regulatory like ideas of like what should be the limit to the device, because at a certain point some of these devices are going to break games and be able to allow people to cheat effectively, or at the very least reduce human error to the point at where it doesn't exist. And granted, they'll do that by case measure, but you should have a framework of what is considered game breaking or device breaking or cheating at a certain point. You should quantify where that limit is. It's easier to quantify something that is a limit as opposed to what it, doing it by a case situation. But I understand why they do. There hasn't been a large repertoire of devices that are breaking the game. And I'm thinking of like situations like the GAF box. If you don't know what the GAF box is, the GAF box was the whole situation with like Daigo Umehara, where he was able to manufacture his own hitbox variation, but it fucked with the software of the game too. So he was able to like basically do impossible inputs because of that. It was ruled as cheating. So I understand why they do it by a case-by-case situation, but eventually we're going to get to a point, it may be a while from now, but we are eventually going to get to a point in where controller devices, because there's no like format that we can all agree on what is acceptable format, they're going to eventually there's going to be more devices that break the game than there is non-devices that break the game. That's going to happen eventually, because there is a controller arms race that is going on with not just fighting games, but video games in general. It's going to happen eventually.
For example, in lots of fighting games, the input for a forward dash is tapping forward twice in a row.
Damn, that's a cool ass stage.
Dashes are usually quick enough that they're right on the edge of being reactable. So in the heat of the match, when your opponent is trying to look for and react to a half dozen different things, you can sneak in a forward dash and start some offense. On a lever, the travel time of hitting forward, letting the lever go back to neutral, and then hitting forward again will take long enough that you'll see the character walk forward a tiny bit from the first forward input, stop, and then the dash comes out. This stutter step telegraphs the dash and gives your opponent a little bit of extra time to react to it. On an all-button controller, you can press and hold forward and then tap and release back. Doing the back cancels out the forward, so when you release it, it gives you a second forward input. You get an instant dash, which is much more difficult to react to. Because of the input that the developer chose for a dash, my controller makes my dash better. This is why Guilty Gear Strive adding a dash button is a big deal. Your input device doesn't matter. Everybody can dash the same. Accessibility led to that initial push towards simpler inputs, but I think this controller issue is what's going to keep us headed down this path. If you balance moves around traditional inputs, certain controllers will make those inputs easier. However, if any given move is just a simple button press, it's going to be the same for everybody, whether they're on a traditional arcade stick, an all-button controller, or a Guitar Hero controller. Thanks as always for watching. I go by Zissou online, so if you want to find more of my stuff or support me, here's where you can go.
Great video. Great video. I don't agree with all the points. I do think that, you know, and granted, I'm a nobody, so I don't have that much of a voice overall, but he did a great job with this video, and he put in a lot of hard work, and I think that he gets massive credit for it. If you like his content, definitely check it out. It's available on YouTube, again, by the name of Press Buttons Win. Made a great video about this, and I think that he deserves a lot of praise for putting in that much work into it. But that said, I do think that there is a lot of things that he said that I don't entirely agree with. I don't think that we're at a point where fighting games should not have both options available. I think that committing to one control layout is not a bad thing, but I also think that it's not the right idea to say that both options are not valid. You know, I think that having games to give you either a choice between the play style is really smart, and I think that either having that or having both games or games giving you both layouts at the same time is also a really smart approach. But I think that having one approach isn't a bad way of doing it, but to say that it's like, you know, that it should be that way, I think is not I don't think it's the right way to approach the game. I think that there are a subset of players that genuinely feel that I wouldn't say a subset. There is a lot of players that feel that modern controls, or not modern controls, classic control inputs are very difficult, and ignoring that is a mistake. I think that including a control scheme or including a way for them to participate in the game that is fun is important, and it's also important for, you know, people that know how to play fighting games too, because a lot of times the time to learn a new character can be time committing, and again, it's one of those things where having a class or a modern control scheme, or even a simplified input button system, is not a bad option, because it allows you to, like, you know, bum rush through like maybe single player content that, you know, you want to play through and enjoy that process of it and have fun playing that without having to go through the whole process of learning a new character. There comes a point where the fighting game, yeah, it's a competitive fighting game and it's a competitive game, but first and foremost, it is a video game, and prioritizing the fun of the game should be more important than prioritizing the balance of the game. Yes, balances can be a problem later down the road, but you can always fix balances with either updates or changing certain things later down the road. And I think that most people have found that modernized controls, along with classic controls and legacy controls, actually relatively merge relatively well together. People are not that upset about modern controls being in fighting in Street Fighter. It's a control scheme that most people find acceptable on both sides of modern controls as well as class controls. There's only a small subdivision of players and that are legacy players that find it annoying. Yeah, it can be toxic as fuck and very irritating to fight a Luke who can do a level 1 super repeatedly, but that's not the reason why he's winning the fight. It's just an annoyance to deal with and something that you have to approach the fight very differently. And as irritating as it can be, you just have to change your approach because it's a totally different character that you're fighting against. And that in many ways is not that much different from, like, take for example Mortal Kombat X, where you're fighting a different variation of the same fucking character. It's just at the end of the day, you're just changing your approach, and that's it. And yeah, that can be exhausting and frustrating, but I think that's a far better outcome than alienating new players. But that said, you can have traditional fighting inputs that still appeal to new players. So I always go back to the major component of what draws people in isn't whether or not a control scheme is one way or another. I think that is a mistake to assume. What draws players into your game is content that is fun to engage with, and that's beyond just the fighting itself. Single player content is something that is so overlooked by fighting game developers, and right now they are paying more attention, but I still think that they're putting not enough attention into the single player content, that I really think that they really should be investing a lot more time into it. I understand that it's very time consuming to create a balanced fighting game and that it is very difficult, but invest the time into single player content that is really good. People really liked Tekken and people really liked Mortal Kombat for its single player story mode. Granted, it's a short story mode, that only lasts like 5 or 6 hours at most. In some cases, it can last longer. But people enjoy that stuff. People will love to participate in the cinematic experience of that. Why not make it bigger, better, bolder approaches that go beyond that? A ton of single player content that keeps people playing the game and learning how to play the game because of that. I enjoy single player content super like a lot if it's really, really engaging. I like one of my favorite single player content is by far Mortal Kombat Deception, but I also think that Street Fighter 6 is, in my opinion, a superior open world game in comparison to it because of all the flaws to Deception. But the experience of playing Deception at that time when it released was mind-blowing to me. I loved it. Granted, I didn't love the actual combat of the game because the combat of the game is frustrating. The actual fighting in that game is really frustrating. But I committed hours into the game and really tried to learn how to play the game. But the game was busted beyond fucking all belief, and it wasn't a great fighting game in my personal opinion. But nevertheless, still, that time commitment, the more time that you invest into a game, the more that you're going to learn how to play the game because you're already investing that time, more likely at least. So make side quests teach you how to play the game, and make there be multiple side quests that keep teaching you how to play the game. Don't just have one side quest that makes you do the circular inputs. Have multiple side quests that do that. They increase in difficulty, increase in repetition, so that way you can learn how to do it. Make it a side quest, not a main quest. That's my personal take on it. This is still a great video nonetheless.